Hello, Podsmashers of the internet, and welcome to another episode of
80-bit Podsmash,
where gaming goes to grab a beer.
We're your hosts, Penguin and Termite. I'm Penguin.
I am Termite.
And we are a weekly video game podcast, smashing together topics and ideas that you care about with video games. Tonight we are doing the last in our Sega Soul in the Console series, and we're going to be talking about the Dreamcast. Unless we go back and do the Master System, I suppose we might end up doing that. But for now, the tentatively last one, Dreamcast. And yeah, so in that, we just trying to break down each console, talk about the history, the hardware, and just sort of the notable impact and legacy that it had on the gaming industry. And so we've been doing all the Sega consoles, and we finally have gotten to the Dreamcast. And boy, oh boy, if I thought the drama was peak during the Saturn, this one's going to be a doozy. So we'll look forward to that. But we are where gaming goes to grab a beer, so what are you drinking tonight?
I am continuing to drink Woodford Reserve, like a lame-o, because I'm still working through that bottle from 4th of July, and I'm still trying to slim down a little bit, and I went a little nuts on my birthday, so I have to ratchet it back in. And so Woodford Reserve bourbon, the same deliciousness that I've been enjoying every week since the 4th of July.
Nice. I'm drinking one of my Fly Jacks from Firestone Walker. I actually drank this on the stream I did this week for Ghost of Tsushima. So if you saw that, that's the same beer I was drinking on that. It was also the same beer I drank during our episode with our friend Ryan, and I did not read anything for it because there was nothing on the can except for it says Beer Before Glory, which is awesome. But
sweet. I
grabbed the box because I needed to consolidate. I still have one left, but I was going to throw away the box. But the box has stuff on it, so I'll read that. Okay. So it says Citrus Hazy Crisp, 96 calories, 5 carbs, everything you want from a hazy IPA with nothing to weigh you down. This is Fly Jack, Firestone Walker's 96-calorie beer. Maximum flavor, minimal calories, no compromises. Brewmaster Matt Brynildson, so shout out Matt, and his team are passionate in pursuit of the perfect beer and never satisfied. They will never be satisfied. With their mastery of hops and thirst for innovation, they're on a quest to provide you with incredible flavors and impeccable beers. So, yeah, that's Fly Jack. I can definitely agree with the point where it's got maximum flavor. It doesn't taste like a beer that's low carb, but it is. So, it's cool.
Sweet.
Yeah. That's the beer. So, we like to start off the show talking about news and things going on. So, what do you got to share with us today?
Cuphead surprise dropped on PlayStation 4 on July 28th, which was Tuesday. PlayStation 4's version of the Studio MDHR's run and gun shooter comes to the PlayStation Store. So big surprise. It was kind of announced by Jeff Keighley's Summer of Gaming. And if you don't know what Cuphead is, it's this awesome like indie game that's drawn in 1950 style cartoons.
Yeah,
it's a side-scrolling platforming. Extremely stylized, yeah, and it's ridiculously hard, and yeah, it's on PS4 now. Who would have thought it was an Xbox exclusive forever? So.
It's a very unique looking game, which is awesome. I really want to see more games in that style.
Yep.
But yeah, can you imagine like a cel shaded 3D like open world game with that style? If they could manage to make that work, that would be cool.
That'd be fantastic.
Like Wind Waker, but with like a 1950s cartoon. That's what I want. I want Cuphead. I want Cuphead World. Cuphead,
yeah, make it
Super Cuphead 64. But yeah, it's a very I've never played it, but it's cool that was it Xbox exclusive for a while? Yep. Like it's owned by Microsoft, yeah. So it's the fact that it's come to exactly. The fact that it's come to PS4 is pretty cool. So
and then you had a news
story.
I
did. Yeah. So I just read about this today. I had apparently it's been going on for like a month, but I had not known. So again, kind of in the same vein as some of our topics that we've been talking about since the episode on sexual harassment that we dropped a few weeks ago. There continues to be more and more news as this movement continues to pick up steam. And I don't pay a lot of attention to the competitive WoW rating scene, but every once in a while, if it pops up on my news feed, I'll check it out. And it turns out that one of the top U.S. guilds, one of the top guilds in the entire world, is a guild called Method, and they I'm familiar with them because I've seen that they've had several world firsts of raid bosses that they've downed, and they disbanded. The entire guild disbanded in the past month or so because of sexual harassment accusations from the leaders, towards the leaders. So some of the guild members who are female who have raided with them again professionally past, they came forward and said that that one particular member had sexually harassed them, and in one case there may have even been sexual assault involved. So that's when it gets really serious. So their leadership was basically forced to resign, and the guild, without their leadership, a raiding guild like that can't compete anymore. So their guild entirely disbanded. Some of the members have formed a new guild and are going to try to compete, but at that caliber of play, it's like a blow like that means that the chances of them being able to salvage something from the wreckage are minimal. You're talking about it's basically esports, right? So you're talking about sponsorships, you're talking about supporters, and just without that monetary compensation, I can't imagine that they're going to find a lot of success without kind of reproving themselves. But their entire leadership is never going to be able to competitively raid again with any expectation of sponsorships, because it's serious stuff. So it's crazy though. Yeah. It's just like it's good. It's very good. Like I never really was a fan of any of the competitive raiding guilds, but like, even if I had any modicum of respect for them before, like, and all of their successes are tarnished now when you consider that they had to harass people, or that they enabled harassment and in some cases assault for years, and kind of swept it under the rug and stuff like that, and that they had to come, these women had to come forward. It's like, yeah, nope, cool, you're done. Your entire legacy is completely tarnished. And so good riddance as far as I'm concerned. I hope that I hope that you never raid again. So yeah, that's pretty, again, it's just crazy things that are happening, and these people are getting exposed, and it's good stuff.
All right.
Cool. I didn't know if you had anything you wanted to add or talk about, but
no, you covered it. That's fantastic. Good riddance for that. I'm glad that the Me Too movement that's happening in the gaming industry continues to work. I mean, that's exactly the stuff that needs to happen. It sucks for all the people that are involved in that guild that did not have bad behaviors, or they weren't complicit in any of that stuff. Maybe they didn't even know.
Exactly.
So it sucks for all them. Hopefully they'll land on their feet with a new guild. But this is the kind of stuff, man, we got to take it down. Like that's the systemic things that need to change. It's a combination of these types of collapses that happen. And yes, we'll get new guilds. Yes, these people will continue to work, except for those who have been marred. Hopefully they will not, or find it extremely difficult to find people to work with again. Mm-hmm. And change is for the good overall, even though it sucks in the moment. Yep,
for sure.
Yep.
All right, cool. Well, that's about all the news we have to cover, so we can move on pretty quickly now if we want to the fact that, jerks who lead raiding guilds and cover up behavior that is harmful towards people, and specifically women, are not our favorite thing, but
doing this podcast is our favorite thing.
Doing this podcast is our favorite thing. Favorite things is a segment of our show where we just kind of update you on the thing that we are excited about, the thing that we're digging, the thing that gives us a spark of joy, if you will, so that you might find your next favorite thing. Take it away, Termite.
Well, yesterday was my birthday, and
happy birthday! I sent you a Marco Polo. Did you see my Marco Polo?
I did.
Nice.
I thought I laughed. I responded.
Did you? Oh, maybe you did.
Yeah. It was a quick response, which is probably why you forgot.
Probably.
It was just a giggle, but thank you. And I took the day off work. We spent the day as a family. We had these grand plans to drop the kids off at my parents and have like a trip down to Richmond to a brewery and restaurants, and like sit outside and be kid free for the afternoon. But that fell through because my son got sick, and we didn't want to risk getting anybody else sick. He had a fever of 103 on Saturday, and so we were like, we're gonna move. We're gonna punt this event to somewhere else in the future, and we'll revisit that later. So I ended up staying at home all day, which was fine. We had pancakes, my favorite lemon blueberry pancakes that my wife made for breakfast. We had Mexican food for lunch, and then for dinner, she had made a lasagna out of a running cookbook from Shalane Flanagan. If you're in the running community at all, she was the winner of the New York City Marathon, and she was for women, and she was the multiple like top 10 Boston marathoner. I mean, she's amazing. But she has a cookbook, and in there is this lasagna that's made with sweet potatoes and spinach and noodles and marinara sauce and turkey sausage, and it's amazing. So we had that for dinner. But all of that could be my favorite thing. But specifically, the gift that my wife surprised me with is my favorite thing, and that's what I'm going to talk about.
We're family friendly here, so be careful.
We are. Yeah. Oh, wow! I didn't even think about that. You incepted that thought into my head. I wasn't even going there. This is a physical object that my wife bought me, and it is a water bottle.
We're family friendly. Come on.
Nice.
A water bottle. Tell me about your water bottle.
Well, I was taking a sip to that one. So it's a water bottle that comes apart in two halves, and in it, you can insert a beer bottle and screw it back together. And it is a double-walled, insulated bottle holder that looks like a water bottle. So you can take it out, like walking in the neighborhood with a beer. And you don't look like a schmup walking around your neighborhood with a beer, even though I don't find that offensive at all. I would totally walk around my neighborhood with a beer. But apparently that's like taboo to do such things.
You can't. So technically you can't have open containers in public, I believe.
That's true. Right.
So, yeah. But I mean, that's the old trick. That's the old trick of pouring like taking a Dasani bottle and pouring vodka in it. You know, they're not going to know unless they get up in your face. And then, is that water in that bottle, sir? I don't know. You tell me, officer.
I think vodka in a water bottle is a little bit more irresponsible than just drinking a beer, but I'll give it to you. Sure. The bottom half of this water bottle
at one point.
Oh, totally. Yeah, we like smuggled beer into a lab in school in Taco Bell styrofoam cups. So yeah,
nice.
It was awesome. And anyway, the bottom half of this water bottle fits a can. So you can do the same thing with sparkling water or beer cans, and you can take it and it serves as like a koozie. It's double walled, so it's insulating, and it doesn't, like, your body heat doesn't go into the drink, and it's awesome. And so I was really surprised by it because I didn't expect her to get that. And it was super fun, and I can't wait. I haven't actually taken it out of the house with a beer in it yet. I did take a walk today with a sparkling water in the can side, and it was glorious. So I can't wait to be walking around out and about in the ways with a beer, and no one has any idea.
You're going to feel so powerful. You're going to feel like the biggest spy master in the world. You're going to be like, nobody knows right now. It's like going commando, where you're just like, yeah, nobody knows.
Nobody knows.
Nobody knows. You need that sometimes. Every once in a while, you need to do that. Maybe not the going commando thing, but you need that feeling of nobody knows. Nobody will ever know. Yeah, that's good.
Family friendly.
If parents want to explain what going commando is, they can always say it's keeping GI Joes in your pocket.
Yep. So that's what you want to call it.
That's what you want to call it. All right. My favorite thing is my sisters came into town to see their nephew on over the weekend, and that in and of itself is not my favorite thing. What was nice is they agreed to watch him and hang out with him while wearing masks and appropriately social distancing as much as possible with the 1-year-old, and they enabled us to go out on a date, which we haven't had since March. Which is
same here. I'm in the same boat
because we started this entire quarantine. The very first way it affected us was it canceled our anniversary trip. So we were going to go skiing, and it was going to be a belated anniversary trip for us. And that was the very first thing that happened, was it canceled our ski trip. So this is the first date, just the alone time with the two of us. That's not like part of the day where the kids a bit in bed or whatever. So just a time for us to get out and enjoy one of those companies. So that was awesome. We're on keto, so we went to Mason-Dixon for lunch. Mason-Dixon Cafe is a restaurant in Fredericksburg where they have a keto menu. So you can basically replace, you can get any of their sandwiches and replace the bread with an almond bread, basically like an almond toast. So I got a pimento cheeseburger with the keto bread, and it was so good. And my wife got a BLT, and actually we each split. We did half and half of each other's sandwiches, and man, it was one of the best BLTs I've ever had. Even with the keto bread, it was just like they had a mayo on it, and they had just the right amount of lettuce and bacon on it. And I'm not usually a big BLT fan, but that thing was awesome. And then after that, we went over to Brock's over by the river. It's a bar down by the river in Fredericksburg, and we sat outside overlooking the river, and we got mojitos, which we didn't realize until after we had ordered them that mojitos very, very obviously when you take the first sip, like they have simple syrup or simple sugar or whatever as one of the ingredients. And I'm like, oh yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, we're going to have this be kind of a cheat portion of our day because this is way more carbs than either of us are supposed to be having right now, but whatever, we're on a date, whatever, and it was very good. We were so glad to get some. I've been craving mojitos for a while, as I think I mentioned in the last episode, and so being able to get out, have some no kid time, even just for an afternoon, good lunch and good drinks was it was just rejuvenating. It was great. So yeah, that's my favorite thing. Huzzah!
Yay!
So if you pull any recommendations out of that, I would recommend if you're on a diet or even if you're not, Mason-Dixon Cafe is an incredible lunch place. And if you're in Fredericksburg local or if you're visiting Fredericksburg or Virginia in general, you should check out that restaurant and that bar because it's nice just getting a table by the river and having some drinks. So
there you go. Do it.
Huzzah! All right.
There's a new restaurant coming out.
I've heard the biscuit, the biscuit one. Fork and biscuit. I looked at their menu. It's kind of expansive, but yeah, I heard that you can get any of their biscuits like keto or gluten-free, keto-friendly or gluten-free, so that's kind of cool. But we're actually going to be transitioning off the diet here in a week or so, whether we'll have time to go try the biscuit place out, we may just try it out as not keto and enjoy whatever we want. All right. Well, cool. I think that's favorite things then, which moves us to our next segment, which is DLC. Downloadable content is what DLC stands for. It's because both of our names are Dan, and we are loading up a fun sub-discussion, mini-discussion that may or may not be related to our topic, and it is a conversation you would normally have about video games. So, in honor of Sega, in honor of this being our maybe last stolen console for Sega, I wanted to do a DLC related to Sega and ask you to discuss with me, in some parallel universe where Sega did not make video game consoles, what would you want? What universe would you want to live in, and what product would you want Sega to design that you would buy? Any other product. It can be electronic, any other electronic, but it can't be video game related.
Well, the bias here is I know how dysfunctional Sega was as a company. And does that change in alternate universe? Because if that's the case, I don't want nothing from them.
I mean, it depends. It depends on your perspective. You can also pick it like any time. You could say like Sega at their peak with the Genesis. You know what I mean? So
yeah,
I feel
it doesn't have to be a video game related thing. It could be like any kind of product.
It could be any electronic or any product. It could be any product at all. It could be a water bottle if you want. Right. But, well, yeah, maybe that's why it popped into my head because you've just been talking about a water bottle.
Right.
But it could be electronic. It could be a TV. It just can't be explicitly a video game thing. Like, you can't cheat and be like, I want them to make a handheld Sega. Like, whatever.
They did. It's
I know
called
they
Sega
did.
Nomad.
I know. I'm aware.
Yep. I was thinking it would be cool to see Sega make a car. They designed Sonic the Hedgehog because they wanted it to be appealing to my age group, which was a young teenage boy or a young boy prior, like preteen, right? That was the market at the time, which, like, okay, boil that down to like how they would approach marketing a car. Not that the car would be marketed to young boys, but there would be a target demographic. And in my alternate universe, it would be now, and the targeting demographic would be everyone.
Mm-hmm.
But bucking the system. So you look at Toyota, Nissan, Ford, Chevy, like all the car makers, they all have like the same kind of categories of cars. It's like the two-door or the coupe, the one-door, right? Or the two-door sedan. And then they like hatchback version of that. And then they upgrade to like, this is the luxury sedan, the bigger car. And they have all these categories. I feel like Sega would like change that. And they would have to have a hatchback. Like, I feel like Sega just needs to have a hatchback car.
Yeah.
And it's probably going to be like a rally version of that. So it's off-road and just crazy. But I feel like they would have something innovative to add to like the work commute car, especially with electric technology. Because Sega always has these crazy gimmicks with all of their consoles. Like every single console had some sort of attachment or extra. We'll talk about Dreamcast specifically tonight, but there's always these extra add-ons. It's the Sega CD, the 32X, that were just nuts and expensive and didn't really like catch on. But I would really want to know what that would look like with a car.
What that would look like a car, yeah, and a car in which like relatively inconsequential add-ons are like part of the experience. So,
right.
But you actually got me thinking, like along those same lines, not necessarily a car, but like I would have loved to see if Sony had put their energy and their like innovation with things like character design and stuff like that. If they had put that towards like an amusement park, like can you imagine like what like a Sega amusement park would look like, especially in the 90s at their peak? At their kind of peak where they're marketing towards like the cool, edgy, you're a kid, but you want to be a teenager. And I think that would have been...
it would be the amusement park that is the most shut down for rides breaking because they're the most crazy, like the most fast, like really, really, really skirting that line of what's
it would be like
really
very
safe.
much like it would be like a Cedar Point where they just have tons of roller coasters, but with that additional aspect of like they are just a little bit too crazy and shutting down anytime like it rains, like it sprinkles. It's like, okay, all the rides are shut down. See ya.
Yeah.
But like, they could have their character design. Like they maybe in that universe where they made theme parks, Sonic still came to be, just not as a video game character, as like an amusement park mascot. So that's kind of what I'm thinking. So cool. That's great. Good answers. Good answers all around. So yeah, that's DLC. Tell us tell us, listeners, what your perfect alternate universe Sega product, if they had not made video games, what would it look like? So we want to hear from you. So the best place to let us know those things and interact with us is Discord, where you can literally get us live in some cases, wandering around in our own worlds and our own bubbles, or we'll post. We've been doing better about trying to schedule posts for our Reddit thread. So if you haven't dusted off our Reddit for a while, it's been a little inactive, but we're trying to, I found out that you can schedule posts. So now I can write them when I'm editing the episode, and then when they'll go live the day the episode drops. So those are there for you guys to converse, and there's going to be one specifically about this DLC for you to discuss. So please let us know your thoughts and feedback on that DLC, because again, it's meant to be a fun discussion. It's meant to just be something to spark the imagination.
And those are ways you can interact with us, like kind of at an individual level. But if you want your voice to be heard on this show, echoed to our audience at large, you can leave us a review at Apple Podcasts, sorry, is what they're calling it now. And you can go and leave a review with us. Tell us what you think, and we will read it on the show. And of course, we're a family-friendly podcast, so we will censor it to that nature. But if you want to tell us how you feel or what you think about our show, go there and leave a review, any number of stars that you feel in your conscience we deserve, and we will read it. Right. We haven't had a review since 2018.
Positive, negative, goofy, serious. We will read it on the show. So please, we want your honest feedback, and we are willing to proclaim it to the world.
Perfect time to troll us. I'm just saying.
Exactly. You can totally
say whatever you want. We're going to read it.
Exactly. I check it regularly. I check it weekly. So yes, we have not had one since 2018, and we are desperate for your Apple Podcast feedback. So please share it.
Indeed.
Great. That's DLC and the post DLC stuff. So we can finally move to our main topic, which, as we said, we are doing the next in and potentially last one for our Dreamcast line of Soul Console. It's up for debate.
Sega line?
Sega line. What did I say? I said the Dreamcast, which is the last in the Sega line. So yes, we are talking all about the Dreamcast. It's kind of a deep dive into the Dreamcast. So we're going to kind of go over things like history of the console. We'll talk about hardware. We'll talk about the discussion. We'll discuss the controller itself, and we'll get around to things like definitive games and the impact on the legacy it had. So that's kind of the outline here. So let's start with the history. Let's start with the story. What is the Sega Dreamcast, and how did it come to be?
Oh man! So. Go back to our other Sega episodes if you want. And that's the context for what Sega has been doing. We walked through the Genesis and the Sega CD, Sega 32X, and the Sega Saturn, and the kind of beginning of the downfall of Sega started to make itself known with the Saturn. And like the Saturn, if you Google the Dreamcast, you will find more drama than you will console.
Yeah.
Because it is marred with a crazy story. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, we'll recap some of the context of the Saturn, because you really can't talk about the Dreamcast without talking about the failure of the Saturn. It really sets the stage. So we'll briefly recap that. But yeah, if you want a more in-depth deep dive as to kind of how that's happened, then we have an episode on it. And we also have an episode on their heyday with the Genesis. So it's not all bad. But yeah, so check those out. But so do you want to talk a bit about what went wrong with Sega at the with their last console, picking up the story where we left off?
Where did we leave off? Yeah, I don't remember a whole lot, and I don't have the resources in front of me, and I know my memory just needs to be jogged because I've read... There's a book called Console Wars, which is absolutely incredible, and I need to look up the author. I'm going to do that right now because it's that important. Console Wars documents the war between Nintendo and Sega throughout the Super Nintendo, Sega Genesis, Dreamcast. It ends at like the Dreamcast, the N64 GameCube era, and it was written by Blake Harris. So please go check him out and check that book out. It's amazing. And I read that whole book and it talked about the Saturn. We did a whole podcast on the Saturn. Yet right now is all blanks because the mics are live and we're in front of an audience. So I don't remember the details of the Saturn. So the Saturn, I just know that it flopped.
Yep. The Saturn was basically it lasted all the way up to about 2000, the year 2000. So it was released in 94, I think, right? And then came out. And then they discontinued it officially in 2000. But it was kind of pushed by the president of Sega America at the time, Tom Kalinske, who was in conflict in a lot of ways with the Japan branch, the president of the Japan branch. So they kind of had a falling out, and Tom Kalinske left in 1996, right in the middle of the Sega Saturn. So Sega replaced him with Shiochiro Irimajiri. Butchered his name, I'm sure, but Irimajiri is he was appointed as the chairman for CEO or for Sega of America. So that was 96. It's important that I hit the dates right here on this. So then they also made, I think, Bernie Stoller, who was a former executive of Sony America, Sony Computer Entertainment America, and they made him the executive vice product of Sega America. And so he kind of pushed the charge in regards to discontinuing the Saturn and moving on. He was the one who said the Saturn is not our future. So he already had his eyes on the next console. So that is when, the N64 launched, and that kind of was the last death knell on the Saturn. The real thing that killed the Saturn was it was too expensive. They announced it at $399, and that was the famous Sony being like $299 when they announced the PlayStation. So the PlayStation,
that was awesome and legendary.
PlayStation just undercut the Saturn like crazy, and that's what really started its downfall. And then when the N64 came out, by that time, their sales were struggling, and so the N64 kind of killed it. So, yeah, with that context in mind, Sega started working on their next console, and rumors that were spread by Sega I'm trying to see the date here. It looks like by 1998, Sega themselves started spreading rumors about their next console. But they had something like 54.8% decline in consumer product sales by 98, which is insane. And so
the Saturn also had this crazy hardware to develop for. It was like multiple CPUs. We talked at length about it in that podcast, but that's also kind of what attributed to lack of third-party support and the internal struggle between Sega of America and Sega of Japan at the end of the Sega Genesis 32X that led to Tom Kalinske's departure. All of that kind of like marred Sega's name, and people were just kind of dipping their toe in the water with Sega. They weren't jumping in full blown. So that's also context to where
Sony was just signing on third party after third party. But anyway, so that's kind of gets us to the beginning of the Dreamcast, and you would think that Sony, it's gonna be the entire time, man. You would think that Sega would have gotten their crap together and really brought their best foot forward with the next console. But again, it just seemed like they had a culture of conflict in that company, because the development of the console really lended itself to even more drama. There was supposed to be a partnership with Lockheed Martin as early as 1995. There were reports that they were going to be collaborating, and there were basically two competing it looks like graphics processors that were designing like there was one that was like an American graphics card, and there was another that was a Japanese, and apparently there was conflict as to like the American branch of Sega wanted to go with the American designed one, and the Japanese wanted to go with the Japanese. And so since Japan got to make the final call, they were the ones who they picked the Japanese graphics processor, which apparently ticked off EA because EA had invested in the American one. So before the Dreamcast even came out and was even announced, EA basically said they were going to be discontinuing their partnership with making games for Sega. So that was a big blow. But yeah, they started designing it in the late 90s there. And gosh, what it says they spent
the graphics cards in question, because I know
Sure.
of these from my own personal experience. But the one was the Americanized one was the 3DFX, not Americanized. The American one was 3DFX Voodoo 2 and the Voodoo Banshee graphics processors, along with Motorola PowerPC. And PowerPC, I want to say, was a UK focused thing, but those would be a CPU pairing. Motorola PowerPC with 3DFX Voodoo 2, and those would be commercial off the shelf, like easy to get parts because they're used in modern PCs. The final choice graphics processing unit was actually an NEC Power VR2. And we'll get into the hardware in a minute, but that was the one that EA was like, we don't know how to do that. They've invested in 3DFX, unfamiliar with the NEC one, which apparently was less powerful as well. So that was also not as appealing to EA. And why EA matters and why we keep bringing it up is because they were the biggest third party at that time.
Right.
Today we have a bunch of different third party developers that are all equally as huge. But actually, EA is probably the most profitable today, even amongst the consoles. But EA really mattered back in the 90s. So highlighting that too.
No, that's great. That's very important context. Yeah, I mean, at no point do you want EA to not make games on your console, even today. It's just a huge company, and it has been. Maybe we'll do a deep dive on EA at some point. It
is interesting highlighting this whole hardware struggle. Like Sega actually did try to do something different with the Dreamcast, because the Saturn was held back by its high production costs and overly complex hardware. So with Dreamcast, they were trying to use subsystems working in parallel with each other and trying to grab commercial off the shelf stuff that was common in video game consoles and personal computers at the time to reduce the overall production cost. But that decision actually backfired because there's a bunch of different reasons why the launch kind of got off to a limp. One of them was the failure rate in the factories for those chips was actually really high. And so they promised a whole bunch of extra units to their pre-orders and for their lines that were wrapped around the building, but they couldn't actually make or meet that need. And so again, you have shortage of supply and a crazy high demand. And like Sega wants to sell as many consoles as you can, but you only can sell what you have. And with more than half of its stock being pre-ordered, you have to stop pre-orders early, and that drops demand because that's kind of like, oh, you can't get it. And then mix that with like their biggest flagship title, Sonic Adventure, was actually delayed a couple of weeks. And so like you didn't really have a Sonic game. You had a couple of games at launch, and all of that kind of led to like a limp launch. And that's not what you want. So even though they tried to like correct a little bit of course correcting from the Saturn, like it still didn't help.
Yeah.
Unfortunately.
I'm reading that they spent, it looks like they spent about $80 million on hardware development, $200 million on software development, and $300 million on promotion worldwide. So that's $580 million, of development or of investment cost for the console. I don't think that includes manufacturing either. So I think, they still have to manufacture the consoles and sell them. Anyway, so that leads us back up to launch. So the console in Japan launched a year earlier than it did in America, or America.
Mm-hmm.
But it
as
launched,
things typically did back then.
Yep, exactly. So it launched in 1998 and
November.
Didn't do bad. It said, despite taking massive losses on the Saturn, including a 75% drop, Sony felt confident about its new system. They announced Sonic Adventure would be a launch title, I think.
Right,
I'm not
but
sure.
it was delayed.
It was delayed, but it was eventually a launch title for the American launch. Anyway, so it was delayed, but they only ended up having one game on launch, which was a port of Virtua Fighter 3. Nevertheless, it sold out in Japan. Its entire stock sold out by the end of the day, so they didn't do too terribly, but it did better. I think overall its shares did better, or its sales did better in the United States. It would launch in the U.S. or in North America on September 9th, 1999, for $199, and it was their marketing team dubbed it 9999. That would be September.
It just like continues the Sonic Tuesday.
Yeah, exactly. The
Saturn,
kind of
like,
gimmicky
why?
marketing. Yeah.
Yes. Sorry.
But they had 18 games available at launch when it came out in America, and they set new sales records by selling more than 225 million. No, 225 million. 225,000 Dreamcast units in 24 hours. So yeah, it had a decent launch, but they were really just kind of selling that first wave. And the console would end up struggling in the years to follow.
A quick correction.
You said
there was one launch game. There's actually only 4, which is still not good.
Apologies, yeah.
But the one that was the highlight was Virtua Fighter 3 with the Dreamcast arcade stick. And that was because it was one of the most popular arcade games in Japan. And it was actually the biggest seller at launch. The other 3 games were games I've never heard of, called July, Pen Pen Trisalon, and Godzilla Generations.
Gotcha.
Which, like, the fact that I've never even heard of them as a video game enthusiast who have been in the industry for years is telling. But the idea, like, the plan was to release 1 game a week for the 4 weeks following the launch. They were going to launch Blue Stinger in December, Geist Force, Sonic Adventure, all through December, and then go into Evolution, which I don't know what that is, Incoming, Monaco Grand Prix, Racing Simulation 2, and 7th Cross Evolution. Half of those titles were delayed last minute, and some stuff was pushed into the next year. The planned launch title, Sega Rally 2, which was hugely popular, was also affected, being knocked back to January. So the console came out in November in Japan, and they didn't get Sega Rally 2 until January. And then Sonic Adventure saw a 2-week delay to December 23rd. Resident Evil Code Veronica was also planned to launch early in Dreamcast life, but that was delayed until the fall of 99, almost a full year later. So lots of weird software delays.
Yeah.
I would like to know more about why those things were delayed so much.
Mm-hmm.
But again, like, they're trying to fix the Saturn's problems. They were like, Saturn didn't have a proper Sonic game on it. Like, there was a problem with software on Saturn, and that's what led to its demise. So they had this whole plan to, like, launch title after title that were supposed to be reinvigorating the Dreamcast excitement in Japan and just pumping out stuff. We saw that modern day with the Switch. Every single month there was a solid Switch game coming with ridiculous amounts of third-party support that would fill in the gaps.
Yeah.
I remember, like, ARMS and Splatoon 2, like, just being trickled out all the way out. You started with Zelda and then all the way out to Mario Odyssey, which was like the fall after the Switch had come out in March. And I just remember, like, every single month there was something I wanted. It was something big.
Mm-hmm.
It's a smart strategy to have, and they were trying to do that. It didn't work.
Yep. So the first blow to the Sega here, the Dreamcast, is not surprisingly came from Sony. So apparently the launch was considered a success, but their momentum was slowed significantly when Sony in 1999 revealed their beast, still one of the, if not, no, it is the single best-selling console of all time. They announced their plans for the PlayStation 2, which just, all the stats basically trumped the Dreamcast in almost every way, it looks like. So, Sony came in big with the PlayStation 2, and it paid off for Sony, but not so much for Sega. That's when sales started to really slow, and they just had, they had a decline as early as January of 2000, which ironically is about the time when I believe I first encountered the Dreamcast, quite honestly. But yeah, still. So, and then, again, without EA providing third-party support, they really started to have trouble when facing down against the PlayStation 2. So, did you have anything else to fill in with that? With kind of what
the North American launch happened, like you said, September 9th, 1999. There was a string of defective discs with Sonic Adventure, Blue Stinger, and Ready to Rumble Boxing. Final Fantasy VIII was also launched in the same time frame. So there's a whole bunch of stuff happening there. But it did relatively well at launch. Over 1 million machines were sold in North America in over 2.5 months, so 11 weeks, according to Peter Moore. The milestone was reached on Tuesday of November 23rd. So from September 9th to November 23rd, they had reached the first 1 million units sold. It was the fastest selling video game machine in North America of all time. So like it was awesome. Sega claimed a 3-to-1 software to hardware ratio at the time, suggesting 3 million games had been sold. So actually some good news coming out of the launch of Dreamcast, at least in North America. And why would the console go on to be so marred in controversy and dragged down and fail? Like you just mentioned, the PlayStation 2 started to make headlines. That's one aspect of that. So we'll continue evolving this story. What's next?
Yeah, so in 2000, May 22nd, 2000, Iri Majiri resigned, I guess, as president of Sega, and he was replaced by a guy named Okawa. If you're counting, which I'm not sure you are, that is the Iri Majiri replaced the president of Sega first he replaced Tom Kalinske, and then he ended up replacing the president of Sega altogether, the Japan branch. So he replaced him in 1998, and then he was himself replaced in 2000. So if it sounds like a revolving door of leadership, that's exactly the case. They basically had a changeover of 3 different presidents over the course of 2 years. And the new guy, Okawa, he saw the dwindling sales of the Dreamcast, and he had long been an advocate for Sega discontinuing hardware and going into just doing software, just making games, basically. So he then became the president, and he convinced the rest of the company to do that. The drama comes where he had gotten together with all the studio heads of the people who made the games, and he announced his plan to focus on software instead of hardware, and the studio heads all walked out.
Wow. Yeah, that happened.
Yeah.
That's it.
Basically, yeah. So I don't exactly know. It's not really clear to me whether that walking out means they quit or walking out means they just walked out of the meeting and processed it. I would need to read into that further. But there was definitely some drama involving getting the rest of Sega on board with their plans to go software, especially when it's your studio heads, the people who would be making that software.
Yep.
But they formally announced the discontinuation of the Dreamcast on January 31st, 2001. And they announced they were restructuring the company as platform agnostic third-party developer. And that's when they would go on to make games for Nintendo consoles, PlayStation consoles, and they've gotten a pretty good success under their belt making games. So one can look back on their legacy and say, like, oh yeah, they've had a pretty good run of actually just developing software. So, but in order to get rid of their stock, the Dreamcast saw some pretty deep cuts in its price in order to eliminate the inventory. So the first cut was they went down from they launched at $199 and they went down to $99, and then a further reduction. I see $79, and then the lowest price I think here was $49.95 for the last units on the shelf. That's crazy. $50, less than a game now. You could have gotten a Dreamcast back in 2001, spring of 2001. So that's it. Wow. That's the story. That's the history. That's kind of
we didn't really talk. There's a little bit more about the PlayStation 2 launch. Retailers actually started to make way for PlayStation 2's launch and stopped ordering some of the Dreamcasts, which is an interesting aspect of selling hardware that we don't really talk about today because we have the online infrastructure that we don't think about, like retail space, like physical space. So like PlayStation and Sony was eating Sega's lunch. I mean, like that last holiday of 2000, the Sega Dreamcast would sell, there's a number ahead in front of me, 463,000 units in December of 2000. 463,000, right? The original Sony PlayStation sold 515,000. And there were 640,000 N64 sold. So at that point, like Dreamcast really was down. Sony was still going crazy. Everyone was hyped about the PlayStation 2, and dissatisfied customers were, Dreamcast has no content. What's going on? We're like hyped about the PS2 coming. And so it's just kind of dwindled and like fluttered out. So it was really strong out the gate, right? The Dreamcast was awesome, fastest selling console ever. But just it came out in September of 99, and just over a year, it just completely dropped.
Just completely whiffed, yeah.
Yeah, completely just done. And in the end of January 2001, when you had just mentioned January 31st, when they announced the cancellation, only 3 million Dreamcasts have been sold overall.
Man.
And of course,
it's so like you think, I mean, even the Saturn limped along for a few years, you know what I mean? So to see the console just fail so spectacularly right out of the gate, pretty much, maybe not, had a decent launch, but after that, I mean, what, like, of course, a new console launches and you're going to have the diehard fans, the tryhards who are going to just, you know, eat them up. But you're going to see it again with the PlayStation 5 and the Xbox. You know what I mean? Like, people are going to snag that first round of manufacturing, the first ones off the shelf. But that's typical for a console. But it really is. It's that next wave. It's that second wave of consoles that you try to sell. And in the Dreamcast case, it just didn't really take off. And so a lot of, you know, there are a lot of factors that contributed to its decline. I'm going to pull a couple of quotes here because other people say it better than I do. But Dan Whitehead from Eurogamer, he said that the wait-and-see approach of consumers and the lack of support from EA were symptoms rather than the cause of Sony's decline, concluding that Sega's misadventures during the 1990s had left both gamers and publishers wary of any new platform bearing its name. And then did you want to do the Jeremy Parrish one after that as well?
Yep. Jeremy Parrish from OneUp.com says, while it would be easy to point an accusatory finger at Sony and blame them for killing the Dreamcast by overselling the PS2, there's a certain level of intellectual dishonesty in such a stance. Sega's poor US support for hardware, like the Sega CD and 32X and the Saturn, made gamers gun-shy. Many consumers felt burned after investing in expensive Sega machines and finding the resulting libraries comparatively lacking. So that goes back to that name going through the mud.
Yep,
like,
I was gonna say
Sega was weird. It's like, we're not gonna go that, like, maybe we'll just wait. Sony's got something cool coming. Yeah,
I was gonna say that's just sort of a lesson that, you know, it's a good lesson, a good cautionary tale for anyone to learn, which is like, Sega's failure is Sega's responsibility. You know what I mean? So like, it's easy, it's tempting, I should say, to be like, well, Sony killed Sega. Like, Sony competed, and Sony certainly dealt some blows to them, but their failure to adapt and their failure to put out products that people actually wanted rests solely on their shoulders entirely. Like, that's business, right? So yeah, it is a part of. I appreciate that perspective because it's part of game development and the gaming industry that I don't think is often talked about. A lot of people just want to blame other things for the failures. For their failures, but the reality is like, no, yeah, Anthem failed because BioWare failed.
Right.
So yeah, it's a cold, cruel lesson that everyone has to learn at some point. But
indeed.
All right. Well, that gets us. I think that does it for history. Let's talk about. I wonder if people are like, that does it for the show. Well, I thought you were going to talk about other stuff. Let's talk about.
Yeah, we got lots more to talk about.
Yeah, I was going to say, let's talk about the console itself. Let's break it down as we do in these episodes. What was the Dreamcast from a pure hardware perspective?
Here we go. So his launching price was $200, which we never actually talked about. We talked about all the other prices.
We said the $9,999, the September 9th.
Right, but the cost was $200.
Oh, gotcha. Yeah,
it cost $200 at the time.
That's fine.
Yeah,
that's
right. Yeah. Anyway, for the central processing unit, the CPU, it was the Hitachi SH4 RISC at 200 megahertz. The GPU was the NEC Power VR2 at 100 megahertz. It had 16 megabytes of RAM, 8 megabytes of video RAM, and that is pretty much the hardware. I want to compare it to the PlayStation 2 at the time.
Sure.
So the CPU had a 200 megahertz processor. The PlayStation 2 had a 295 megahertz processor that was a custom, quote, emotion engine. And then the GPU had 100 megahertz. And the PlayStation 2's graphics synthesizer custom GPU had 147. The RAM in the PS2 was 32 megabytes, twice as much that was in the game Dreamcast. So that's like, and that's a 2-year difference.
That's like,
2 years late.
That's like, I was doing some math in my head, and I'm like, okay, so the CPU was about 30% more powerful on the PlayStation. The graphics was about 50% more powerful, and the RAM, they had about twice as much RAM. That's insane.
Yep.
Like you said, it's just a 2-year difference in the release of those consoles. So, yeah.
Yeah, we talked earlier about how like this architecture was more in line with like mainstream computers, and so it was supposed to be easier to program for, cheaper to produce, cheaper to sell, and allow like a lower barrier of entry for developers. but that still didn't work because of the major defects that were happening on the factory line, and like that cut supply, and then the fight with EA and EA pulling out, and all those things kind of all.
Did you talk about
this whole thing?
Did you talk about the video RAM, the VRAM on the Dreamcast?
That's gonna save for our last question.
Oh, okay, cool, gotcha. All right, fair enough. It did have 8 megabytes of VRAM. I don't know if that's.
Oh, I did say that.
Oh, you did?
VRAM is
sorry.
video RAM.
My bad.
Yeah, that's the RAM that's for the graphics. Yeah.
Yep,
that's 8 megabytes.
Okay, I didn't know
PlayStation 2
missed that part when you were explaining it. So
the PlayStation 2, at least the resource that I have, does not list how much RAM was for
dedicated
specifically for the.
It may not have had
GPU.
Dedicated. Yeah, I don't know how
it may not have.
popular that was.
But 16 plus 8 is not 32, so that's 24. So they were still shy of the PlayStation 2's hardware there.
For sure. Cool. Well, yep, that is the Dreamcast from a hardware level.
Yep. I used these new like GD CD-ROMs. So it was a proprietary optical format called GD-ROM, and it could hold 1.2 gigabytes of data per disc, which was way more than the 800 megabyte like CDs we're used to that Sony was using for PlayStation and we were using for music. Like you go buy a CDR, it has 800 megabytes of storage. This was 1.2 gigs, so it was a little bit more storage on the disc. And I do want to talk about, they had some like easily breakable DRM. And one of the other things, it wasn't huge, it wasn't like massive in its downfall, but one of the other blows to the Dreamcast was that CD-ROM format, or that GD-ROM format, was very easy to pirate. And so you could get not just pirating as far as getting a game for free, but also region breaking. So you could get Japanese games, you can get European games, and you could just copy them. Like I heard so many stories growing up, like firsthand. I'm the primary source here. Talking to my friends who had a Dreamcast, would go to the video store and rent all of the games that they wanted to play. They would go home to their PCs, throw them in a computer, and copy them, and just burn them.
Yeah, I remember hearing about that too, actually. Yep, I remember my friend
they would
who
keep
had
them forever,
Dreamcast.
and they would be able to play them. And I'm not sure if there was any software you needed to install that you could get off the internet. I think there was. And it was just like a super easy hack that would like allow you to have all the games you wanted completely free just by burning copies. And it read the CD-ROM format. So it was interesting that the games were on a GD-ROM format, but you could still use regular CDRs to copy them as long as the space like lined up, and you could still play games. So piracy was huge.
Yep.
Yeah.
I was curious, so I did look it up while you were talking, and the PlayStation did have 4 megabytes of dedicated video RAM. The PlayStation 4, did I say 4? PlayStation 2. PlayStation 2 had 4 megabytes of dedicated video RAM.
Oh, okay, there you go.
But yeah, I mean, again, and just like with our last discussions of hardware on these consoles in our last console series, these numbers are tiny by today's standards. Like, we're talking megabytes, right? Like the new consoles, the next gen consoles are coming out with 16 gigabytes of RAM, both, or something along those lines. Like we have made huge leaps in the technology, but again, I will say as a reminder, these consoles came out 20 years ago, and it's been 2 whole decades of innovation and development since these consoles came out. So yeah, 32 megabytes of RAM on the PlayStation. That's nuts. And 16 megabytes of RAM for the time was a solid piece of computing equipment. But obviously, one is twice as much as the other. So the PlayStation really ran out. So it strikes me as just kind of odd that the Dreamcast wasn't able to do enough with their head start. You know what I mean? They had a 2-year head start on the PlayStation, at least in Japan, and they just weren't able to make the most of it. But all right, cool. Well, I think that's all about hardware. We want to talk about the controller, super important piece of the console as a whole.
Yeah.
Yep.
Cool. I want to say that this is the first console to launch. The second console. Well, okay. So you look at a modern controller, and you have a joystick on the left side. The N64 tried this, but it had that claw grip, and the left quote-unquote hand would go down to the joystick, but it was still the middle of the controller and quirky and awkward. And then the PlayStation came out with no joysticks, but later introduced the DualShock, which had a joystick under the D-pad. So you had to reach across the D-pad down to the joystick. So what makes the Dreamcast controller unique is that this is a console with a joystick where your thumb would normally just lay naturally if you grabbed a controller.
Yep.
So it was weirdly shaped. It had it looks like a CD with wings on it. So it's got this round like
yeah,
face.
Yeah.
And it has
see that.
4 buttons on the face, and there's no select button. There's only like a start button at the bottom. And in it, and we'll talk more about why there was a slot, but there was like these N64 style memory card slots in the top of the controller. It is a very awkward controller. It does not feel very good. The wings that I was talking about like are thin, and like your fingers kind of go back, and it's weird the way that they lay.
It was a weird controller. It was big. It was one of the bulkier controllers. It would kind of be the precursor to the Xbox, the Big Duke in my mind. But it was leagues beyond what the N64 had going for it. So as a Nintendo kid encountering the Dreamcast for the first time, not having had the GameCube yet, I was like, wow, this controller is so great. I really, at the time, liked the Dreamcast controller. But again, that was based on a comparison that was faulty at the time. So I have fond memories of it. Did it have trigger buttons? I'm trying to remember if
it had left and a right like trigger buttons, which were the first, because the PS controllers had shoulder buttons, had 4 of them, but none of them felt like a trigger, like an analog trigger. Like
I guess the Nintendo 64 had the Z trigger or whatever, but that was just one. So having 2 triggers,
that wasn't
one
even
for
a
each
trigger
finger,
either. That was
it was just a button. Yeah.
Exactly. This actually has like a spring thing that you have to compress all the way down.
Yeah. So the controller is a mixed bag. We've talked about controllers before. I don't know if it was an entire discussion about all the controllers, so we may not have been able to highlight the Dreamcast particularly. So in this case, yeah, it was a decent controller, but still with some pretty significant design flaws. Controller technology had not really been tested through fire like it has these days. Controller design has, for the most part, settled into a pretty decent, with the exception of Nintendo just continuing to be on crack. But yeah, cool. What innovations?
The console had 4 controller ports, by the way, which was awesome.
Yes,
like the N64 did.
Yes. I was going to say that was another big important aspect of the controller.
I was
gonna say. So let's talk about attachments and stuff like that. What attachments to either the controller or the console? What other accessories or innovations did they bring to the console in that space?
Dude, the visual memory units are amazing. The memory cards that have little screens on them and buttons in and of themselves that are like little handheld consoles that would slide into the top of the Dreamcast. They were awesome. I
don't remember them, and I don't remember what they were for.
They were like, they had memory on them. They had a little sound speaker, a D-pad. They had 4 buttons on them, and it presents game info. So if it's plugged in while you're playing a game, it would have a screen shown through the controller. Like the controller had a hole for that to be shown. So when you slid a VMU, it's the virtual memory unit, down into the controller, you have the screen, and it would connect to certain Sega titles. So like you could raise virtual pets called chows in Sonic Adventure, and they would show up on the VMU. You could use VMUs to call plays in NFL 2K, so that your opponent couldn't see them. So it was almost like a second screen.
Yeah, I was gonna say they were totally innovating in that second screen space.
Yeah, and it actually is tied to, weirdly enough, the zip drives from iOmega. If you remember, did you remember zip drives back in school? Like the big giant versions of floppy disks that were like, hold 100 megabytes of data instead of a floppy. That iOmega announced a Dreamcast compatible zip drive. That's an aside. That's another like attachment, but I thought that was interesting. So but the VMUs were awesome. You could take them with you. You could store stuff on them and then take it with you elsewhere and still continue to like manage your pet or like see and navigate through the memory card. It was really, really innovative. It was really cool.
Awesome, yeah. And what other attachments for the console were there? There was wasn't there a modem attachment as well?
The modem actually was built into it, and the operating system was Windows ME, I think.
Oh my gosh, for real? I remember Windows ME on PCs. Millennium Edition, I think is what it was called.
Yeah. I need to look it up because it might not be that exact. CE. It was Windows CE.
Windows CE.
My bad.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Found it at the same time.
And that was, I wonder what it stood for. Dreamcast is known for running an optimized version of Windows CE with DirectX as an operating system.
Compact? It must have been. Yeah, Windows. It said Windows Embedded Compact, formerly Windows Embedded CE, and Windows CE. So I guess those stand for embedded compact embedded, something like that.
Interesting. So yeah, I mean, it was definitely the first console with internet connectivity built into it from launch. It was not an add-on. It was like in the console for everyone, but it was a 56K dial-up modem. And
Woof.
I don't really know a whole... Yeah, right? But apparently that's all you needed to play Doom or Quake. Like back in the day, that's what used it. Like Quake and Unreal Tournament were games that were on the Dreamcast that used the modem so you could play online. There was later a broadband adapter that you could add. It's like Dreamcast Connect or something. I don't remember what it was called. There was some other like Rumble packs, like Sega's Jump Pack was added, just like N64. And then, like I said, the iOmega zip drive thing, you could store more data. There was a camera that was later. I don't remember what it was called. I just had it in front of me. I didn't even know there was a camera for it at all. And it was like Dreameye. Sega produced a Dreameye digital camera that could be connected to Dreamcast and used to exchange pictures and participate in video chat over the internet connection. So it's another use of that modem.
Crazy.
Internet-enabled cell phone stuff was going on with Motorola. So that's kind of weird. Don't know anything about that. But yeah, definitely like the more weird Sega stuff that I alluded to in the DLC segment when I said it would be cool to see if they could build a car. But yeah, that's a lot of attachments going on.
All right. Well, then now let's talk about games. What games were kind of definitive for the console? What actual games were playable in the space and still have a potentially lasting legacy today? Obviously, I was gonna say right out the gate, the big one, Sonic Adventure. We talked about it in our Sonic episode. We talked about it in some of we talked about Sonic a lot in our Sega episodes and stuff like that. So yes, this was kind of after having not released a Sonic game for the Saturn, which we talked about in that episode, and instead they released Night into Dreams. They finally came out with this was the first mainline Sonic game since the Genesis, and it was Sonic Adventure 1, and a great game. I liked Sonic Adventure, but it was kind of Sonic's first foray into 3D space. But yeah. So there was that. The other big one, I think that did well for the Dreamcast was Soul Calibur. It was a fighting game, just a fantastic fighting game. That was Midway. Was that Midway who released that, or was that Namco? Okay, yeah. And then there were some other good ones too. So do you want to talk about some of the other ones?
Yeah. So Sega's known for their arcade games. Like that's what. The games themselves were renowned in the arcade in Japan, in North America. We had Daytona racing games. We had all the Virtual Fighter, Crazy Taxi. There was like Ready to Rumble boxing, a whole bunch of stuff. Well, the Dreamcast continued bringing those arcade games to console, just like the Sega Genesis did, just like the Saturn did. And so Crazy Taxi 1 and 2, like who hasn't played Crazy? Have you played Crazy Taxi? It's awesome.
I haven't actually. I've never encountered it.
It's like everyone's played Crazy Taxi except for Penguin.
Apparently.
Like Hydro Thunder. It was like that whole line of racing games. That was Midway. That came like Cruis'n USA, Cruis'n Exotica, and there was Hydro Thunder was like a fast, what do you call it? Speedboat racing game. Jet Set Radio Future. If you ever played that, that's the like spray painting and really awesome like visuals that were cel shaded, and you're on rollerblades like skating around town. Marvel vs. Capcom 1 and 2 was on the Dreamcast, but Marvel vs. Capcom 2 on the Dreamcast was renowned for that system. It was one of the most staple games. And then if you look at a modern day top 10 games sold of all time, you will always see FIFA, Madden, and you will always find a 2K game on that list. The 2K series of both NBA and NFL games started on the Dreamcast, and they still persist today. And that's where they began. And that was because they did not have the EA license for Madden, and there was this company that Sega worked with, and I think it was called something... Hang on, I'm going to look it up because Visual Concepts. So I'm actually going to read this little blurb from Wikipedia here about it. But EA president Larry Props specifically wanted, quote, exclusive rights to be the only sports brand on Dreamcast. That's totally EA, which Stoller could not accept due to Sega's recent $10 million purchase So Sega had bought for $10 million a sports game developer, Visual Concepts, and had started working with Visual Concepts to make sports games. EA demanded exclusive rights to be the only sports brand on Dreamcast, so Sega was like, well, we just kind of bought the studio that's going to do that for us, so no can go. And EA's Madden NFL series did have an established brand power. Stoller regarded NFL 2K as far superior and providing a breakthrough experience to launch the Dreamcast. And while the Dreamcast would have none of EA's popular sports games, quote, Sega Sports games developed mainly by Visual Concepts helped fill that void. And then, so anything 2K, like all the 2K series today are not that, I mean, that's their legacy. That's the pedigree. That's where it started, was on the Dreamcast. So if you've ever played a 2K game, you can thank the Dreamcast for getting I cannot remember this company. You can tell I'm not a sports fan. Visual Concepts, the developer, you can thank them and their Sega's partnership for your enjoyment of any of the 2K sports we have today.
Yeah.
So Midway Games, they made NFL Blitz, they made NBA Hang Time, like the more arcadey sports games. Ready to Rumble Boxing, I believe, was Midway. And so they started with Sega Dreamcast and ported a bunch of stuff over to Dreamcast. Those were all like quintessential Dreamcast games. Power Stone 1 and 2 from Capcom.
Yes, Power Stone.
Yeah, Power Stone is awesome,
one of
right?
one of the most fun, like, it was like Smash Bros, except not Smash Bros. It was like like a top-down version of Smash Bros is how I remember it. But it had that same fun, like, you know, character fighter and just like getting together with your friends on a Saturday morning and playing Power Stone was like one of the highlights of my childhood for sure. That and Soul Calibur. I just remember like I go to my friend's house who had a Dreamcast and we would just spend the whole day playing Soul Calibur and Power Stone with his brothers and just, it was a blast.
I really, really wish I had a Power Stone.
I wish you did too. I would come over and play the crap out of it. Yeah, it was such a good game.
I do have Soul Calibur, but I do not have Power Stone.
In that kind of similar space, there were some pretty decent RPGs in regards to just like influential RPGs, I should say. Phantasy Star Online was the first online console RPG for consoles. Developed after Okawa requested an online game, they were trying to basically make an action RPG like Diablo, but simplify it for console audiences. And then Skies of Arcadia was first on the Dreamcast before it was eventually ported to the GameCube where I ended up playing it. Yep. But very, very underrated and underappreciated RPG. And then, of course...
I'm dying to play that game so bad.
Yeah, dude, you gotta borrow it from me sometime. And then the big one, I would say probably the single most influential RPG on the Sega was Shenmue.
Yep.
It's got super big cult following. Shenmue, the third one, ended up having ended up funded on Kickstarter, which is one of the biggest Kickstarter projects of all time. And but yeah, Shenmue, it started on the Dreamcast and was super innovative. Like they were the first to introduce QuickTime events in their modern form, the ability to like have like simulated day-night cycles, and the ability to like pick up and examine objects. That was all explored in Shenmue on the Dreamcast. So like the Dreamcast did not have like, in regards to its lineup of games, it had a pretty solid lineup when you actually look at it in the history of games.
Right.
But it was just, at the time, people just looked at the PlayStation's library and was like, nah, man. I'm gonna get the PlayStation, yeah. So I would be very curious how the Dreamcast would do. Like if you were to hold it by today's standards as a launch with its lineup of games, I think the sheer amount of innovation they were doing is respectable in the software space. It's so unfortunate that Sega failed in the hardware regard, because these developers were really bringing forth their A game in making the best games they could for this console. I mean, Soul Calibur is, in my mind, is the fighting game of all. Like, I like Soul Calibur more than Mortal Kombat. I like it more than Tekken.
Really?
Soul Calibur is only topped in my mind by Smash Bros. In regards to the fighting game space, and there are two entirely different types of fighting games. I love and adore Soul Calibur, and have always adored Soul Calibur. So, I have a lot of respect for what the game developers were putting out on the Dreamcast. So it's just, again, it's so unfortunate that they failed in the. But even a Resident Evil game came out for it. Resident Evil Code Veronica. Came out for it. Tekken came out for it. Like you said, they were always known for their arcadey games. They had a bunch of rail shooters on the Dreamcast at launch, including House of the Dead 2, and a game that sounds fascinating to me that I'd never heard of before called Rez. And it says here that it was an attempt to simulate synesthesia in the form of a rail shooter. Synesthesia being the like people who actually see color. See color when they hear sound, I think is what it is. So like they're trying to like simulate that. I'm like, man, they're experimenting with like, like different mental states in games before. That sounds so, it may not be the best game in the world, but the fact they were trying it, I mean, it's very senuous sacrifice to me in the sense they're trying to emulate a mental state that most people don't have. That's kind of crazy.
It sounds like it was a little bit of a rhythm shooter too. Because it says like the thumping score evolves as you progress through each level while enemies explode to the beat of a synchronized harmonious bliss.
Mm-hmm.
So I wonder if there is, I never played it. I didn't even heard of it.
Yeah, so I never heard of it until now. It's definitely something I'd be interested in now in experiencing, just because it sounds like something that's super artistic. So,
yep.
I mean, really, this leads us to our next question: is what is the impact and the legacy of the Sega Dreamcast? And aside from, of course, being just kind of the final nail on the coffin, the last death rattle of Sega's console existence. I mean, I would say in that game space, like those developers, that's really, to me, the legacy of the Dreamcast is the games themselves. Like they were really, that's the big, to me, that's the biggest tragedy of the Dreamcast, is that those developers were really putting their best foot forward and really doing lasting innovations in the gaming space, and they just didn't have the hardware. The hardware just didn't back it. So yeah. That would be my takeaway. It's just like, I loved the game. I have very fond memories of the games on the Dreamcast, but I can't say that I miss the console itself.
Yeah, and I talked about how 2K, the entire line of 2K games started on the Dreamcast. That's a huge legacy in the sports world, bringing a big competitor to Madden and what EA had put in there. And I also want to say, like, there's some racing games that were like Sega Rally that were kind of the grandparents to things like Project Gotham Racing and what we know is like Forza Horizon today, or even some of the Need for Speed, which Need for Speed was EA as a competitor. But like there's a whole like Sega racing games that wasn't just the rally stuff either. It was the Daytona line of stuff. Like, that's an awesome legacy that happened. And it's cool actually today to see Sega working as a software publisher, because we can see things like Working Designs has a ton of like Japanese anime RPGs of various names that are now prolific on the platform. We have Persona because Sega is software.
Yeah.
Like that's awesome, right? And then we had the slew of Sonic games, which are various mixes of hitting and missing across like all the different platforms. I have Sonic Adventure 1 and 2 on my GameCube, and I know there was like Sonic Heroes after that, and they continued into PS3 and Xbox 360, and the Wii, and there's like Sonics everywhere now, and I think that's beneficial to the industry as far as an IP and its proliferation and what it offers to games in general. That's a lasting legacy too.
Absolutely, yeah. It's kind of a bittersweet legacy. It's the idea that though the Dreamcast was ultimately a flop, it was ultimately a failure, and it led to Sega backing out of the console race altogether. I mean, its legacy is that it was the motivation that Sega needed to really innovate and prototype what it looks like for a big name developer to make that transition in a way that is, for the most part, graceful. Like, I mean, I know there was some drama and there were some missteps, but and Sega may not be the household name that it once was, but they've done a lot of great work in the gaming industry since. I mean, even up to this day, my vast enjoyment of the quality that they put out with Persona 5 was, is just like, I'm still enjoying Sega products to this day, and it's because they decided to say, hey, you know what? We're going to transition from making hardware consoles to making games and making that our effort. And like I said, like I've predicted with Microsoft, we may be seeing Microsoft eventually transition into that same kind of mindset. And that was prototyped by Sega. Sega was the one to make the first step into saying, we're going to bow out gracefully, and instead we're going to put all of our efforts towards making great games, which is what they started with the Dreamcast, and and they continue to do this day, is make good games. So yeah, I think that's kind of the legacy that I feel like they left me with. So All right, well, that's our show. Tell us, we want to hear your thoughts on the Sega Dreamcast and all the possible things we could talk about. Do you think it was a success, a failure? Did you have a Dreamcast? Do you like the Dreamcast? Do you hate it? We want to hear all of those thoughts and more. And as I mentioned on the onset, we will have a scheduled Reddit post going live. So you can literally go to Reddit right now and share your thoughts there. Or, Termite, where else can the good listeners of the internet get a hold of us or interact with us should they so desire?
You can go to our newly minted HTTPS encrypted, secured website, 80bitpodsmash.com. And not the website itself being newly minted, but the fact that it's now secure is a thing. It's awesome. So HTTPS 80bitpodsmash.com. That's our landing website. You can find links to all of our podcasting platforms there: Apple Podcasts, Google Play, iHeartRadio, Spotify, and Stitcher, etc. Our RSS feed link is there. You can throw it into any third-party app you would like. All of our shows and all of the show notes are also on that website. So for your viewing pleasure, we have a blog. You can check out things that we write and stay in touch with us there. We have social media outlets, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and Reddit, all 80bit Podsmash, 80bit Podsmash, all lowercase, no hyphens, no funny business. So you can check us out on all of those. Social media stuff, interact with us, ask us questions, insert your thoughts, comments, questions, concerns, thoughts, and ideas. We would love to have more interaction with all of you. We have a Discord server as well. It's in the show notes of every episode and usually pushed to Facebook because I have enough character space to put the Discord link in there versus other social media outlets that don't have as much character space. Twitter, looking at you. So we have a Discord server, and we also stream live on Wednesdays every weeknight or every Wednesday night at 8 p.m. Eastern Time at twitch.tv/80bitpodsmash, 80bitpodsmash. Look for us there. You can interact with our community and ask us questions live, and we'll respond. We'll talk about games that we're currently digging, stuff that's what we stream, and we'll talk about its pedigree and developers, and we'll try to educate you on the game and hang out and grab a drink with us.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so next week we are going to be talking about character design. So what we mean by that is we've talked about characters before, different types of characters that appear in the stories of games, but how do those characters come to life? How do they look? How do you decide who does the voice? What do they even sound like? That's all part of character design, so we're going to be talking about that in depth next week. So please join us then.
See you next week.